A little beggar girl found a millionaire's wallet. In gratitude, the millionaire offered a reward, and what the girl asked for in return made the millionaire break down in tears. The elegant corridors of St. Mary's Hospital echoed with the frantic footsteps of Dr. Emily Winters. Her white coat billowed behind her as she sprinted toward Operating Room 3, where a life-or-death situation awaited. The patient had just been rushed in a hit-and-run victim, severe internal bleeding, multiple fractures. Female, mid-50s, crashed on arrival, a nurse reported as Emily burst through the doors. The operating room was already a flurry of activity, medical staff moving with practiced precision around the unconscious patient. Emily froze for a split second as she recognized the face beneath the oxygen mask. Even with blood-matted hair and ashen skin, there was no mistaking those perfect features. Victoria Blackwood, the woman who had tortured her childhood, who had nearly destroyed her life 15 years ago. Dr. Winters? We're losing her. The sharp voice of her assistant snapped Emily back to reality. Victoria's blood pressure was plummeting, her heart rate becoming erratic. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the scalpel. In that moment, 15 years of buried memories crashed over her like a tidal wave. The cold mansion floors she had scrubbed until her fingers bled. The endless nights locked in a dark room without food. The threats against her grandfather's life. Victoria Blackwood had been the architect of her greatest suffering, and now this same woman's life rested in Emily's hands. Starting emergency thoracotomy, Emily announced, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her heart. As she made the first incision, she could almost hear Victoria's cruel voice from all those years ago, "You'll always be nothing but a worthless little beggar." The irony wasn't lost on Emily. The scared little girl who once cleaned Victoria's floors was now a renowned trauma surgeon, about to cut open her tormentor's chest. One slight mistake, one small accident, and justice would be served. But as Emily gazed down at her unconscious patient, she saw something unexpected, a single tear rolling down Victoria's cheek. In that vulnerable moment, she looked nothing like the monster from Emily's memories. She was just another human being, fighting for survival. Beginning cardiac massage, Emily declared firmly. Today she wouldn't be the scared little girl seeking revenge. She would be the doctor who took an oath to save lives, even the life of someone who had once tried to destroy hers. The next 4 hours would change both their lives forever, though neither woman knew it yet. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If you'd like to support our channel and experience more compelling stories that touch hearts and explore the depths of human nature, please consider subscribing. Your support enables us to continue crafting meaningful narratives that resonate with souls. In the bustling city of Los Angeles, Emily Winters was a remarkable 12-year-old with a gift that set her apart. Despite living in near poverty with her ailing grandfather in a tiny apartment off Reformer Street, she possessed an extraordinary artistic talent that transformed blank papers into windows to the soul. Emily's small hands, calloused from daily chores, could capture emotions with just a few strokes of a borrowed pencil. Her drawings weren't mere representations, they told stories of homeless people she met on the streets, of tired workers heading home at sunset, of her grandfather's gentle smile as he slept in their worn armchair. Each piece reflected an empathy far beyond her years. Life hadn't been kind to Emily. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was just 3, leaving her in the care of her grandfather, James Winters, a former art teacher now battling chronic illness. Their daily existence was a careful balance between buying his essential medications and securing enough food to survive. Yet Emily never complained, finding joy in small moments and beauty in unlikely places. At school, she was both admired and isolated. Her teachers marveled at her artistic abilities and quiet intelligence, but her worn clothes and obvious poverty kept most classmates at a distance. During lunch breaks, while other children played, Emily would sit alone under an old oak tree, sketching in a tattered notebook her grandfather had given her for her last birthday. What truly set Emily apart wasn't just her talent, it was her unwavering moral compass. Despite their dire circumstances, she had never stolen, never lied, never succumbed to the temptations that poverty often presents. Her grandfather had instilled in her a deep sense of honor, teaching her that integrity was worth more than any material possession. Each morning, Emily would wake before dawn to help her grandfather with his medications, then walk 2 miles to school to save bus fare. After classes, she would often stop by local restaurants not to beg, but to collect discarded newspapers to sell for recycling. The restaurant owners knew her the quiet girl with old soul eyes who never asked for handouts, only honest work. Her most prized possession was a small silver locket containing a photo of her parents. She wore it always hidden beneath her clothes, a tangible connection to the family she had lost. At night she would often open it and whisper stories to their smiling faces, sharing her dreams of becoming an artist who could help others see the beauty she found in everyday life. Despite the hardships, Emily maintained an inner light that touched everyone who truly knew her. She had a gift for seeing past people's facades to their hidden pain or joy, which she captured in her art with stunning accuracy. Local shop owners would sometimes give her scraps of paper or broken pencils, just to see what magic she would create with them. But beneath her gentle exterior lay a strength that few recognized. Emily had learned to be resilient, to find hope in the darkest moments, to keep moving forward when others might have given up. She carried this strength not as a shield, but as a quiet certainty that goodness, no matter how challenged, would ultimately prevail. Little did Emily know that her unwavering principles and extraordinary gifts were about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. Her life, already a delicate balance between survival and dignity, was about to intersect with forces that would either break her spirit or elevate it to heights she never dreamed possible. The next few weeks would challenge everything she believed about justice, mercy, and the true nature of family. In her small, worn sketchbook, she had recently drawn a mysterious figure, a woman whose face seemed to hold both cruelty and pain. It was an image that had come to her in a dream, though she didn't yet realize it was a premonition of the storm about to enter her life. Victoria Blackwood stood at the pinnacle of Los Angeles society, a queen in herself made empire of wealth and influence. From her perfectly manicured nails to her imported Italian heels, every detail of her appearance was calculated to project power and sophistication. Yet beneath this flawless exterior lurked shadows that even her closest associates couldn't imagine. Born Victoria Thompson, she had methodically erased all traces of her humble beginnings. The daughter of a small restaurant owner in downtown Los Angeles, she had grown up watching her father slave away in a failing business, serving customers she deemed beneath her. The grease-stained apron she once wore had been replaced by designer dresses, but the stains on her soul ran far deeper. Her transformation hadn't come without cost, particularly to others. The restaurant she'd grown up in had been her first conquest, a calculated betrayal of her own father, while he lay sick in bed trusting his princess. To save their family business, Victoria had orchestrated its sale through forged documents and manipulated contracts. The money had funded her entry into high society, while her father died alone in a public hospital, still calling her name. Now, as the wife of Alexander Montgomery, one of the city's wealthiest businessmen, Victoria ruled over her domain with elegant cruelty. Her charity events were legendary, though few knew how she used them to destroy rivals and cement her position in society's upper echelons. She had mastered the art of ruining lives with a smile, crushing opposition with perfectly timed whispers and calculated rumors. Behind closed doors, Victoria maintained her power through a complex web of secrets and threats. Her household staff lived in constant fear of her mood swings, learning to read the subtle changes in her voice that preceded acts of calculated malice. Even her husband, for all his business acumen, remained blind to the true nature of the woman he had married. Yet Victoria's carefully constructed world held its own prison. Each night, alone in her marble bathroom, she would stare at her reflection, seeing glimpses of the waitress she once was. The nightmares came with increasing frequency, dreams of her father's disappointed face, of the customers she once served, of the life she had so desperately tried to escape. Her greatest fear wasn't losing her wealth or status, it was being exposed as the fraud she knew herself to be. Every new acquisition, every social victory, was driven by a desperate need to bury her past deeper. She had even hired private investigators to erase all records of her previous life, paying whatever it took to maintain her carefully crafted image. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. She had everything she once dreamed of, yet lived in constant fear of losing it all. Her marriage to Alexander had been her masterpiece of manipulation, carefully orchestrated to secure her position. But even that victory felt hollow, haunted by the ghosts of those she had sacrificed along the way. Victoria's latest project was the systematic embezzlement of funds from Alexander's companies, creating a secret fortune that would ensure her independence if her carefully constructed world ever began to crumble. Each transaction was hidden behind layers of false companies and forged documents, a testament to her ruthless intelligence. As she stood at her bedroom window, gazing out over the manicured gardens of her mansion, Victoria didn't realize that fate was about to send her a reminder of her past one that no amount of money or power could control. A small girl with an old soul and artistic gifts would soon shatter the glass castle she had built on foundations of lies and betrayal. The morning paper lay unopened on her desk, containing a small article about a hit-and-run accident involving a young girl near her old restaurant. Victoria would later remember this moment as the beginning of her unraveling, though she didn't know it yet. Alexander Montgomery commanded respect in the boardrooms of Los Angeles, not through intimidation but through an innate dignity that set him apart from his wealthy peers. At 55, his silver-streaked hair and thoughtful grey eyes spoke of wisdom earned through both triumph and tragedy. Unlike many of his contemporaries, his fortune hadn't been inherited, it had been built through decades of determination and an unwavering moral compass. Behind his success lay a story of loss that few knew. 20 years earlier, his first wife, Sarah, and their young daughter had vanished during a family vacation in Europe. Despite years of searching and millions spent on private investigators, their fate remained a mystery that haunted his quietest moments. The only trace left was a small butterfly pendant his daughter's favorite found in their hotel room. The weight of this tragedy had transformed Alexander. While his business empire grew, encompassing everything from technology firms to charitable foundations, he maintained a compassionate approach that was rare in his world. He was known for giving second chances to employees in trouble, for funding educational programs in underprivileged areas, for seeing potential where others saw only risk. His marriage to Victoria had come after years of solitude, a decision made more from loneliness than love. Though he admired her apparent sophistication and drive, something about their relationship remained distant, a gap he couldn't quite bridge. Still, he had given her increasing control over portions of his business, trusting her sharp mind and seemingly impeccable judgment. Yet lately, subtle changes had begun to worry him. Several of his companies were showing unexpected financial strains. Loyal employees were leaving without explanation. His charitable foundations were reporting irregularities in their accounts. But each time he raised concerns, Victoria had ready explanations, supported by immaculate documentation. In his private study, Alexander kept a wall of photographs not of business triumphs, but of the people he'd helped over the years. Former addicts now running successful companies, single mothers who'd become executives, young entrepreneurs he'd mentored. Among these was a curious empty space, a gap he'd never filled, where his daughter's photo should have been. Despite his wealth, Alexander lived modestly compared to his peers. His true passion wasn't acquisition but transformation of struggling businesses into sustainable enterprises, of desperate situations into opportunities for growth. His employees spoke of his ability to see beyond surface problems to underlying potential, a gift that had made him both successful and beloved. Each morning, before entering his office tower, Alexander would stop at a small coffee cart run by a former homeless man he'd helped set up in business. These quiet moments, sharing coffee with someone who'd turned their life around, meant more to him than any luxury his wealth could buy. It was during these conversations that he felt closest to the memory of Sarah, who had shared his belief in the power of second chances. Recently, Alexander had begun having dreams about his lost daughter. In them, she was no longer the small child who had vanished, but a young woman with artistic talent and gentle eyes. He would wake from these dreams with a renewed sense of loss, but also with a strange feeling of anticipation, as if fate was preparing to reveal something long hidden. His world was about to change dramatically, though he didn't know it yet. The mansion he shared with Victoria, for all its grandeur, had never felt like a true home. It lacked the warmth of genuine family, the comfort of complete trust. The arrival of a young girl with a remarkable gift for seeing truth would soon shatter this artificial peace, forcing him to confront both past tragedies and present deceptions. On his desk sat an unopened envelope containing reports from his latest business ventures. Within its pages lay the first clues to a web of betrayal that would soon unravel his carefully ordered world. But alongside these seeds of destruction lay the potential for something he had almost stopped, hoping for the chance to heal old wounds and create a true family once again. The Grand Oak Grill stood as an elegant testament to success on Reformer Street, its century-old stained glass windows catching the golden light of a California evening. Inside, Alexander Montgomery sat at the most secluded table, his Italian suit failing to hide the weight of worry on his shoulders. Before him sat 3 potential investors who could save his companies from imminent bankruptcy, though none knew the true architect of his financial troubles was his own wife. Outside, Emily Winters leaned against a weathered lamppost, her thin frame shivering despite the mild evening air. Her grandfather's medication had run out 2 days ago, and the sounds of his labored breathing haunted her thoughts. The restaurant's dumpsters sometimes yielded discarded food still good enough to eat, but tonight she hoped for something more. Perhaps a kind-hearted waiter might notice her and share some leftovers. Through the window, she watched Alexander nervously check his wallet again, reviewing the crucial contact information of other potential investors. His fingers trembled slightly as he returned it to his jacket pocket, not quite securing it properly in his distraction. Something about his troubled expression reminded Emily of her grandfather, making her heart ache with empathy. The meeting ended with tense handshakes and non-committal promises. Alexander emerged from the restaurant, his mind so consumed with worry that he didn't notice when his wallet slipped from his pocket, landing silently on the sidewalk. The leather accessory lay there, containing not just money but the last hope for saving his business empire. Emily saw the wallet fall. Her first instinct was to grab it and run. One expensive wallet could pay for months of her grandfather's medication. Her empty stomach twisted with hunger, and her worn shoes had holes that let in the cold. Just this once, perhaps fate was offering a solution to their desperate situation. But her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. Our dignity may be all we have left, little one, but it's worth more than any amount of money. With trembling fingers, she picked up the wallet, holding it like it might burn her hands. Through its expensive leather, she could feel the weight of credit cards and what felt like a substantial amount of cash. "Sir," she called out, her voice cracking from disuse. "Sir, you dropped something," but Alexander was already too far ahead, focused on reaching his waiting car. Emily's bare feet moved swiftly across the cooling pavement as she tried to catch up to him. Then a harsh voice cut through the evening air. "Stop." Thief. The accusation came from a store owner sweeping his doorway, who had seen only a ragged child running with a wallet. Emily's heart nearly stopped as heads began to turn, eyes narrowing with suspicion and judgment. "No, please, I'm just trying to return it," she pleaded, but her thin voice was drowned out by growing shouts of condemnation. More people joined in, their accusations building like a wave. Emily clutched the wallet tighter, tears beginning to stream down her face as she saw her innocent act of honesty transforming into her worst nightmare. The crowd began to close in, their faces twisted with the righteous anger of those who judge without knowing. Someone called for the police. Another suggested grabbing her before she could escape. Emily felt the world spinning as she backed away, her bare feet scraping against rough concrete. Alexander finally heard the commotion and turned, his eyes widening as he realized his wallet was missing. Through the gathering crowd, he caught glimpses of Emily, a small, frightened figure clutching something to her chest. But before he could speak or intervene, panic overtook the girl. In her desperation to escape the hostile crowd, Emily darted between parked cars toward the street. Time seemed to slow as she emerged into traffic, the screech of brakes filling the air. Alexander's shout of warning came too late. The impact was both violent and eerily quiet. Emily's small body was thrown several feet, the wallet still clutched tightly in her hands, her last proof of innocence. As she lay motionless on the pavement, the same crowd that had condemned her moments before now stood in horrified silence. Alexander rushed to her side, his heart pounding with guilt and fear. Kneeling beside her on the street, heedless of his expensive suit, he saw blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. But what struck him most was that even unconscious, her fingers still gripped his wallet, an unfailing honest in the face of cruel judgment. As sirens wailed in the distance, he whispered, "Stay with me, little one." You did nothing wrong. He hadn't known then that these words would change both their lives forever. St. Mary's Hospital emerged from the gathering dusk like a beacon of hope, its white walls and illuminated windows standing stark against the darkening sky. In the emergency room, Alexander paced anxiously, his suit still stained with street grime and Emily's blood. The wallet that had caused all this chaos now felt like a lead weight in his pocket. Inside the trauma room, doctors worked frantically to stabilize Emily. Her injuries were severe but not life-threatening: multiple fractures, internal bruising, and a concussion. What troubled the medical team more was her obvious state of malnutrition and the signs of long-term poverty evident in her worn clothing and untreated minor ailments. While the medical staff tended to Emily, a social worker gently questioned Alexander about the incident. The story seemed straightforward until the police arrived with the shop owner who had first accused Emily of theft. His face had lost its earlier certainty, replaced by a sickly pallor as he realized the consequences of his hasty judgment. "I didn't know," the shop owner stammered, wringing his hands. "She looked like one of those street kids who are always causing trouble. How was I supposed to know she was trying to help?" His words hung in the air, hollow justifications that couldn't undo the damage caused by prejudice. As Alexander listened to the man's excuses, his own guilt weighed heavily. If he had been more careful with his wallet, if he had been more aware of his surroundings, if he had heard Emily's calls sooner, an innocent child wouldn't be fighting for her life in a hospital bed. The sound of her small body hitting the pavement kept replaying in his mind. A nurse emerged from Emily's room with a small, battered locket found around the girl's neck. Inside was a worn photograph of a happy couple with a toddler, Emily's parents. The nurse explained, according to the inscription on the back. Alexander's hands trembled as he held the locket, something about the woman in the photo tugging at his memory. The search for Emily's guardian led to a devastating discovery. Her grandfather, James Winters, had collapsed without his medication and been admitted to a public hospital across town. The elderly man's first words upon regaining consciousness were about his granddaughter, begging anyone who would listen to make sure she was safe. Alexander made an immediate decision. Using his influence, he arranged for James to be transferred to St. Mary's best private room. "Spare no expense," he instructed the hospital administration. "Whatever they need, I'll cover it all." It was the least he could do to begin addressing the cascade of injustices this family had suffered. As night fell, Emily finally stabilized enough for Alexander to visit her room. The sight of her tiny figure amidst the medical equipment struck him like a physical blow. Despite the bruises and bandages, there was something hauntingly familiar about her face, something that reminded him of Sarah, his long-lost wife. Sitting beside Emily's bed, Alexander found himself speaking softly to her unconscious form. "You showed more courage and integrity in one moment than most people manage in a lifetime," he whispered. "When you wake up, I promise things will be different." Unknown to Alexander, Victoria had received word of the incident and was already calculating how to turn it to her advantage. A poor child saved by her wealthy husband, the social possibilities were endless. She immediately began planning a charity event, never suspecting that this particular child would be the key to unraveling her carefully constructed world. The night deepened, but Alexander refused to leave Emily's side. He watched her breathing, studied her delicate features, and felt an inexplicable connection growing stronger with each passing hour. The wallet that had caused all this still contained his business contacts, the potential solutions to his financial troubles, but none of that seemed important anymore. A young nurse brought him coffee, mentioning how unusual it was to see someone of his status so concerned about a street child. Alexander's response was immediate and firm. "She's not just a street child. She's a hero who chose honesty over necessity, courage over convenience. She's what we should all aspire to be." As midnight approached, Emily stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open for just a moment. In that brief instant of consciousness, she managed to whisper one word that would haunt Alexander for days to come: "Daddy." Before he could respond, she had slipped back into sleep, leaving him with a strange ache in his heart and questions he couldn't yet answer. The city continued its nighttime rhythm outside the hospital windows, unaware that this single event had set in motion a chain of revelations that would shake Los Angeles society to its core. Victoria Blackwood's arrival at St. Mary's Hospital was a masterpiece of calculated performance. She swept through the emergency room doors at precisely 9 a.m., dressed in an expertly chosen outfit that suggested both wealth and caring. Her entrance drew every eye, exactly as she had planned. Finding Alexander dozing in an uncomfortable chair beside Emily's bed, Victoria played her role perfectly. She gasped at the sight of the injured child, pressed a manicured hand to her chest in apparent distress, and immediately began issuing orders to the hospital staff about upgrading Emily's care. "Darling, you should have called me immediately," she chided Alexander gently, her voice carrying just the right note of concern. "This poor, dear child needs proper care. I'll handle everything." Her eyes, however, never quite matched her solicitous tone as they studied Emily's unconscious form. It was during this initial assessment that Victoria noticed the locket around Emily's neck. Something about it made her pause, a flicker of recognition crossing her face before she could mask it. With practiced casualness, she reached out to examine it, but a small hand suddenly gripped her wrist. Emily had awoken, and her eyes, still glazed with pain, fixed on Victoria with an unsettling intensity. For a moment, the two stared at each other, an unspoken current of recognition passing between them. Victoria was the first to break away, smoothly transitioning into a warm smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome back, dear one," she cooed, but Emily had already turned to Alexander, seeking his reassuring presence. Victoria noted this preference with narrowed eyes, her mind already formulating plans to establish control over the situation. Over the next few hours, Victoria orchestrated a media-friendly narrative. Reporters were discreetly contacted, photographs arranged, and statements prepared. By afternoon, local news outlets were running the story "Wealthy Couple Opens Hearts" and "Home to Heroic Street Child." Alexander, exhausted from his night-long vigil, gratefully allowed his wife to take charge. He missed the subtle signs, the way Emily flinched when Victoria touched her, how the child's eyes tracked his wife's movements like prey watching a predator, the tension that filled the room whenever Victoria appeared. When Emily's grandfather was finally brought in from the other hospital, Victoria was there to orchestrate that reunion as well. Her camera-ready smile never wavered as she explained to James Winters how the Montgomerys would be taking care of everything: his medical bills, Emily's recovery, their future security. "You'll never have to worry about money again," she assured him, her voice honey-sweet. But as she spoke, her hand rested possessively on Emily's shoulder, fingers digging in just slightly too hard. The message was clear: everything would come with a price. That evening, Victoria announced her plans to bring Emily home to the mansion. She needs a proper family environment to recover, she insisted, overriding the doctor's recommendations for extended hospital observation. Her tone brooked no argument, and even Alexander found himself agreeing to the premature discharge. As preparations were made for Emily's transfer, Victoria made a private call from her car. "I need everything you can find on James and Emily Winters," she instructed her private investigator. "Every detail, every connection, every secret. Something about this girl." She paused, glancing back at the hospital. Something isn't right. Emily watched these preparations with growing unease. Her artist's eye caught the discordant notes in Victoria's performance, the calculated gestures, the rehearsed compassion, the moments when the mask slipped to reveal something cold and predatory beneath. When Victoria returned to help with the discharge papers, she brought an expensive new dress for Emily. "We can't have you arriving at your new home in these hospital clothes," she said, holding up the garment. But her smile held a warning: the transformation from street child to society's newest charity case would be complete and on her terms. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Emily made one last attempt to speak privately with Alexander. "Mr. Montgomery, there's something I need to tell you about," but Victoria smoothly interrupted, inserting herself between them with practiced ease. Now, dear, there will be plenty of time for stories once you're settled," Victoria interjected, steering Emily toward the waiting car. "Your new life begins now." Looking back at the hospital, Emily caught a final glimpse of her grandfather's worried face through the window. She didn't know then that she was leaving the safety of St. Mary's for something far more dangerous than life on the streets, a gilded cage where her every move would be watched by a woman whose smiles held secrets darker than any alley she had ever known. The Blackwood Montgomery mansion loomed before Emily like something from a fairy tale, its manicured gardens and soaring architecture promising a life she had only glimpsed through restaurant windows. The setting sun cast long shadows across the circular driveway as Victoria's car came to a smooth stop at the marble steps. Emily clutched her small bag containing only her sketchbook and the clothes she'd been wearing during the accident like a shield against the overwhelming grandeur. "Welcome to your new home," dear Victoria announced, her voice carrying an undercurrent that made Emily shiver despite the warm evening air. The mansion's staff lined up to greet them, their faces carefully neutral as they observed their mistress's latest project. Among them stood Harrison, the elderly butler, whose kind eyes met Emily's with a flash of concern. Victoria led the tour of the mansion with the precision of a general inspecting troops. Each room was a showcase of wealth crystal chandeliers, priceless artworks, antique furniture that Emily was afraid to touch. The girl's bare feet made no sound on the polished floors, a ghost in this palace of privilege. "This will be your room," Victoria declared, opening a door on the third floor. The bedroom was larger than Emily's entire former apartment, decorated in soft blues and whites. A canopy bed dominated the space, and a pristine art desk stood by the window, complete with expensive supplies. The gesture seemed generous, but Emily noticed the room was isolated from the mansion's main living areas. "You'll find suitable clothing in the wardrobe," Victoria continued, her smile never reaching her eyes. "We can't have you looking like a street urchin anymore, can we?" Her fingers trailed across the expensive fabrics hanging in the closet, each touch a reminder of her control over Emily's new life. As Victoria outlined the rules of the house, when to appear for meals, which areas were forbidden, how to behave when guests visited, Emily's artist's eye caught details others might miss. The security keypads on the windows, the subtle camera in the corner, the fact that the door's lock was on the outside. This beautiful room could easily become a prison. "Your grandfather will receive the finest care at the hospital," Victoria added, her voice honey-sweet but laced with warning. "As long as you show proper gratitude for everything we're doing for you both." The threat was clear: Emily's behavior would determine her grandfather's well-being. That evening, dinner was served in the formal dining room. Emily sat stiffly in her new dress, overwhelmed by the array of silverware before her. Victoria watched like a hawk as the girl struggled with the proper utensils, occasionally making subtle corrections that felt like small wounds. "We'll need to work on your table manners, dear," Victoria observed, her smile sharp as a knife. "We can't have you embarrassing us at the charity gala next week." Emily's hand trembled, causing her soup spoon to clatter against the fine china. Victoria's eyes narrowed at the noise. After dinner, Emily was escorted back to her room by Harrison. The old butler paused at her door, glancing furtively down the hallway before pressing something into her hand, a small wrapped sandwich and a note with his private phone number. "Just in case," he whispered, then hurried away as Victoria's heels clicked on the marble floors. Alone in her new room, Emily sat at the art desk and opened her sketchbook. Her fingers found a fresh page, and almost unconsciously she began to draw. The image that emerged was haunting Victoria's perfectly composed face splitting to reveal something dark beneath, while Alexander stood in the background, his figure slightly blurred, as if viewed through tears. A knock at the door made Emily quickly hide the drawing. Victoria entered without waiting for a response, carrying a glass of water and what appeared to be medication. For the pain, she explained, watching intently as Emily swallowed the pills. "Sleep well, dear. Tomorrow we begin your transformation." As the door closed and the lock clicked into place, Emily stood at her window, looking out over the manicured gardens. The mansion's security lights cast strange shadows across the lawn, and somewhere in the distance she could hear dogs barking. The luxury surrounding her felt suffocating rather than comforting. In the shadows of her room, Emily whispered a quiet prayer for her grandfather, hoping he was safe in his hospital bed. She didn't know then that Victoria had already begun manipulating his care, ensuring that any communication between grandfather and granddaughter would pass through her first. The night deepened, and the mansion grew quiet except for the occasional sound of footsteps in the hallway, Victoria's regular patrols of her domain. Emily lay in the enormous bed, feeling smaller and more alone than she ever had on the streets. The expensive sheets couldn't warm the chill that had settled in her heart. Just before sleep claimed her, Emily added one final detail to her, drawing a small butterfly, trapped in a beautiful but deadly spider's web, its wings still desperately trying to beat against the silken strands that bound it. The morning light filtered through the mansion's stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across Victoria's face as she stood in her private study, examining an old photograph with trembling hands. The image showed a small restaurant, its worn sign reading Thompson's Family Diner, and in the foreground, a much younger version of herself stood beside a man with kind eyes, her father. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into the photograph's edges as another image caught her attention, a small figure barely visible in the background. A child sitting at one of the tables, drawing in a notebook while an elderly man watched with pride. The same elderly man who now lay in her husband's private hospital ward. "Impossible," she whispered, but the connection was undeniable. James Winters had been her father's closest friend, the only person who knew the full truth about how she had orchestrated the restaurant's downfall. And now his granddaughter was under her roof, a living reminder of everything she had tried to bury. Memories flooded back unbidden, James visiting the restaurant daily, always with a kind word and a small treat for the owner's bitter daughter. He had been there the day she forged her father's signature, had even tried to warn him. But by then, Victoria had ensured her father was too ill to understand or resist. The sound of Emily's laughter drifting up from the garden interrupted Victoria's dark reverie. Through the window, she watched the girl showing Alexander one of her drawings. The child's artistic talent was undeniable, reminiscent of another artist Victoria had known, James himself, before arthritis had stolen his ability to hold a brush. Victoria's hand closed around her empty coffee cup, knuckles white with suppressed rage. The girl's presence threatened everything she had built. One word from Emily about recognizing her from the old restaurant, one mention of James's connection to her past, and her carefully constructed world could crumble. Calling her private investigator, Victoria's voice was taut with controlled panic. "I need everything about the Winters family eliminated. Every record, every photograph, every piece of paper connecting them to Thompson's diner. And find out if the old man has said anything to the hospital staff." But it wasn't just the past that threatened Victoria. As she watched Emily and Alexander together, she noticed something that chilled her to her core: the way the girl tilted her head when concentrating, the particular shade of her eyes, the artistic talent that seemed so familiar, features that reminded her of someone else, someone from Alexander's past. Victoria's mind raced as she pieced together dates and possibilities. The girl's age, the timing of her birth, the mysterious disappearance of Alexander's first wife and daughter all those years ago. Could it be? The possibility was too horrifying to contemplate. Moving to her dressing room, Victoria opened a hidden safe behind an original Monet. Inside lay documents she had thought safely buried: newspaper clippings about the disappearance of Sarah and Catherine Montgomery, accident reports she had helped fabricate, the real story behind what happened in that small European town 20 years ago. A soft knock at the door made her quickly conceal the evidence. Emily stood in the doorway, clutching her sketchbook. "Mrs. Montgomery? Mr. Montgomery? Asked me to show you my drawings." The girl's voice was hesitant, but her eyes held an unsettling perceptiveness. Victoria forced a smile, but inside her mind was calculating. The child was a threat that needed to be neutralized, but directly harming her was too risky. She needed a subtler approach, a way to discredit or control her before she could reveal what she might remember or discover. "Come in, dear," Victoria purred, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Let's talk about your future in this house. There's so much I need to teach you." Her fingers drummed against the desk, each tap marking a point in the plan forming in her mind. Emily stepped into the room, and for a moment the sunlight caught her face in a way that made Victoria's breath catch. The resemblance was undeniable now. This child could destroy everything, not just by what she knew about the past, but by who she might truly be. Victoria's face remained pleasant, but her eyes hardened with resolution. She had eliminated threats before, she had buried her past once, and she would do it again. The girl would learn that this golden cage had rules, and breaking them would have consequences far beyond her young understanding. "Sit down." Emily. Victoria gestured to a chair, her mind already crafting the web that would entangle this potential threat. "Let's discuss how a proper young lady should behave in this house." Her voice was smooth as silk, concealing the steel beneath. As Emily settled into the chair, clutching her sketchbook like a shield, Victoria caught a glimpse of the drawing on the open page, a hauntingly accurate portrait of her father's restaurant, complete with details only someone who had been there could know. The walls of Victoria's carefully constructed world began to tremble, but her smile never wavered. The psychological warfare began subtly, like a poison administered drop by drop. Victoria's first move was to isolate Emily from every potential ally within the mansion. Staff members who showed the girl kindness found themselves facing sudden dismissal or transferred to distant properties. Harrison, the kindly butler, was the first to go, replaced by a stern-faced woman who followed Victoria's every command without question. Emily's daily routine became a carefully orchestrated series of humiliations. Victoria insisted she learn proper etiquette, but the lessons were designed to fail. The girl's water glass would be secretly emptied before meals, making her seem uncouth when she asked for more. Her chair would be placed slightly too low at the dining table, making it impossible to maintain perfect posture. "Really, dear," Victoria would sigh during these moments, her voice carrying just enough disappointment to cut deep. "How do you expect to be worthy of the Montgomery name if you can't master basic table manners?" Each criticism was delivered with a smile, but Emily's hands would shake more with each passing meal. The art supplies in Emily's room, initially so promising, became another instrument of torture. Victoria would examine each drawing with exaggerated care, finding flaws that didn't exist, suggesting improvements that would ruin the work. When Emily produced something truly beautiful, the piece would mysteriously disappear, declared not suitable for display. Communication with her grandfather became increasingly restricted. Victoria orchestrated convenient hospital visiting hours that always seemed to conflict with Emily's mandatory etiquette lessons. Phone calls were monitored and letters were lost in transit. Each time Emily asked about him, Victoria's response carried a veiled threat. "Your grandfather's care is quite expensive," she would remind the girl, examining her manicure. "It would be a shame if anything disrupted the excellent treatment he's receiving." The message was clear: compliance was the price of her grandfather's well-being. Nights became a special form of torment. Victoria would have Emily's room temperature adjusted to uncomfortable levels, claiming it was for her health. Strange sounds would echo through the vents, manufactured noises that kept the girl from proper rest. When Emily appeared exhausted the next day, Victoria would comment loudly on her unladylike appearance. The worst moments came during Victoria's social gatherings. Emily would be presented like a prize pet, forced to perform for guests, reciting poetry, demonstrating her progress in etiquette, showing her artwork. But Victoria would always ensure some small detail was wrong: a slightly wrinkled dress, a misplaced fork, a trembling hand. "She's still quite rough around the edges," Victoria would confide to her friends, loud enough for Emily to hear. "But we're doing our Christian duty, aren't we? One can't expect too much from her background." The women would titter, their jewelry catching the light as they nodded in false sympathy. Alexander, absorbed in his business troubles, remained blind to the psychological warfare being waged under his roof. Victoria made sure their paths rarely crossed, scheduling his meetings during Emily's free hours, arranging business trips that kept him away during the worst of the abuse. One particularly cruel afternoon, Victoria gathered her society friends for tea in the garden. Emily was dressed in an expensive but ill-fitting dress, forced to serve refreshments while the women discussed her as if she weren't there. "It's so noble of you," Victoria, one guest, simpered, "taking in a street urchin like this. Aren't you afraid she might steal something?" Victoria's response was perfectly calculated. "Oh, we keep the valuables locked away, of course. One must be practical." Emily's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the teapot, earning a sharp glare from her tormentor. That evening, Victoria called Emily to her study. The girl found her examining an old photograph, though its subject was hidden from view. "Do you know what happens to ungrateful children?" Victoria asked softly, not looking up. "They end up back where they belong, in the gutter." "And their loved ones?" "Well, accidents happen in hospitals every day." Emily's artistic soul, once so vibrant, began to dim under the constant pressure. Her drawings, when she dared to create them, took on darker themes: butterflies trapped in spiderwebs, birds in gilded cages, shadows that seemed to reach out with clawing hands. Yet Victoria had underestimated one thing: the resilience of a child who had already survived poverty and loss. In secret moments, Emily continued to draw, documenting everything in her sketchbook: every cruel word, every calculated gesture, every glimpse of Victoria's true nature beneath her perfect mask. As the grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, Emily sat at her window, adding final touches to her latest drawing. It showed Victoria she truly was a queen of cruelty on a throne of lies, surrounded by the shadows of her past. In the corner, almost too small to notice, was a butterfly beginning to break free from its silken prison. The psychological torture had begun, but so had something else: a quiet resistance that would grow stronger with each passing day, sketched in secret and hidden between the pages of truth that would eventually bring Victoria's carefully constructed world crashing down. The autumn chill had settled over Los Angeles when Victoria's psychological warfare escalated into something more sinister. No longer content with subtle humiliations, she began orchestrating accidents. That left Emily with visible bruises: a suddenly locked door that caught her fingers, a loose stair carpet that caused her to fall, cleaning chemicals that burned her hands. Each incident was carefully planned to appear accidental, with Victoria playing the concerned caretaker in front of others. "Oh, you poor dear, she would coo when Alexander was present. You must be more careful." But her eyes held dark amusement at Emily's pain, and her fingers would dig cruelly into the girl's bruises while pretending to comfort her. The mansion staff witnessed the abuse but remained silent, their own families held hostage by Victoria's network of threats and blackmail. The new butler, Mrs. Pierce, would turn up the classical music in the kitchen to drown out the sound of Victoria's disciplinary sessions. Moments when she would berate Emily for imagined infractions until the child was shaking with fear. "Your father died in a car crash, didn't he?" Victoria asked one evening, examining Emily's latest bruises with false concern. Such dangerous things, cars. One never knows when another accident might happen, perhaps to a certain hospital visitor on his way to see his granddaughter. The threat hung in the air like poison. Emily's art became her only refuge, but even this Victoria sought to destroy. During one of her inspections of Emily's room, she discovered the girl's secret sketchbook pages filled with drawings documenting the abuse. The book disappeared that night, and Emily's art supplies were replaced with etiquette manuals and deportment guides. The psychological torture grew more sophisticated. Victoria began gaslighting Emily, moving objects in her room and claiming the girl had done it herself. Food would disappear from Emily's plate during meals, and Victoria would comment on her greedy appetite. Notes from her grandfather would be altered, words changed to suggest he was disappointed in her. One particularly cruel morning, Victoria presented Emily with a beautiful music box identical to one her parents had given her before their death. "I found it in a second-hand shop," Victoria smiled, watching Emily's eyes fill with tears. "Probably sold for drug money." Knowing your parents' type later that night, Emily heard the sound of breaking porcelain as her treasured memory was accidentally dropped from the third-floor window. The abuse peaked during preparation for an upcoming charity gala. Victoria had Emily practice walking with books on her head for hours, refusing to let her rest even when she nearly fainted from exhaustion. "Proper ladies don't show weakness," she would snap, adding more books to the pile. "Though I suppose you'll never be a proper lady, will you?" Emily's only comfort came from secret moments with Alexander, who remained oblivious to his wife's true nature. He would find Emily in the library sometimes, and they would talk about art and books. During these brief respites, Victoria would watch from doorways, her face twisted with a hatred that grew stronger each time she saw them together. The breaking point came when Emily discovered an old photograph hidden in the library, a family portrait showing Alexander with his first wife and daughter. The girl in the photo shared Emily's artistic talent, her way of tilting her head, her smile. But before she could study it further, Victoria appeared like a wraith, snatching the photo away. "Curious little rats get their tails caught in traps," Victoria hissed, her composure cracking for the first time. She grabbed Emily's arm with bruising force, dragging her to the basement. "Let me show you what happens to children who stick their noses where they don't belong." The basement became Emily's new prison for the next 24 hours. In the darkness, Victoria's voice floated down the stairs, telling stories about hospital patients who never woke up from their medications, about grandfathers who died alone and afraid, about little girls who disappeared without a trace. When Emily was finally allowed to emerge, she was different. The spark in her eyes had dimmed, but something stronger had taken its place, a quiet determination born of survival. That night she began a new sketchbook, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. But these drawings weren't just art, they were evidence. Each page documented the abuse with photographic precision, the bruises, the accidents, the psychological torture. Emily's artistic gift captured every detail, the exact angle of Victoria's cruel smile, the way her fingers curved like claws when she thought no one was watching, the shadows that seemed to follow her through the mansion's halls. Victoria's campaign of terror continued, but she failed to notice the subtle changes in her victim. Emily's apparent submission masked a growing strength. She began memorizing Victoria's patterns, noting which servants might be allies, observing the cracks in her tormentor's perfect facade. Most importantly, she started noticing the inconsistencies in Victoria's carefully constructed lies. The way she froze at mentions of her father's restaurant, her panic when certain old photographs appeared, her obsessive attention to Emily's resemblance to Alexander's lost daughter. Unknown to Victoria, her very attempts to break Emily's spirit were providing the girl with the tools to unravel her web of deception. Each act of cruelty was another piece of evidence, each threat another clue to the dark secrets that lay beneath the surface of the Montgomery mansion. In her room that night, Emily added another drawing to her hidden collection. This one showed Victoria as she truly was not the society queen she pretended to be, but a creature of shadows surrounded by the ghosts of her past. In the corner, Emily drew herself, small but unbroken, holding a torch that cast light into the darkness. The abuse was escalating, but so was Emily's resolve. Victoria didn't realize she wasn't breaking a victim, she was creating her own nemesis. The truth began unraveling on a rain-soaked afternoon when Emily discovered a hidden door behind the library's heaviest bookcase. A dropped pencil had rolled into a gap, leading her to notice the slight draft coming from behind the shelving. With trembling fingers, she pressed against the wood, revealing a narrow passage that led to Victoria's private study. Inside the room was a shrine to carefully preserved secrets. Filing cabinets lined the walls, each drawer labeled with dates spanning the past 20 years. Emily's artist's eye was drawn to a particular folder lying open on the antique desk, documents about Thompson's family diner, her grandfather's old workplace. With her heart pounding, Emily began to read. The papers told a story of calculated destruction, how Victoria, then known as Victoria Thompson, had systematically ruined her own father's business. Bank statements showed money being siphoned away, health inspection reports were deliberately falsified, and customer complaints were fabricated with meticulous care. But it was a photograph that made Emily's blood run cold. It showed a younger Victoria standing with her father, and in the background, Emily's grandfather trying to intervene in what appeared to be a heated argument. The date stamp placed it just days before Mr. Thompson's mysterious death in the public hospital. Further investigation revealed more connections. Victoria had used the money from selling the restaurant to reinvent herself, erasing all traces of her past. But she hadn't counted on Emily's grandfather keeping his own records, photographs, letters, and most damning of all, a deathbed confession from Mr. Thompson himself detailing his daughter's betrayal. As Emily pieced together the past, another discovery shook her to her core. Hidden behind a false panel, she found a collection of newspaper clippings about Alexander's first wife and daughter. The articles spoke of a mysterious disappearance during a European vacation, but attached notes in Victoria's handwriting hinted at a darker truth. The pieces began falling into place. Victoria had been in Europe at the same time, working as a tour guide under an assumed name. She had orchestrated a series of accidents that led to the disappearance of Sarah and Catherine Montgomery, clearing the path for her eventual marriage to Alexander. But the most shocking revelation came from a DNA test report dated just weeks earlier. Victoria had been investigating Emily's background, and the results confirmed her worst fears. Emily was Catherine Montgomery, Alexander's lost daughter, somehow having survived the events Victoria had arranged years ago. The sound of heels clicking on marble sent Emily scrambling to replace the documents. As she slipped back through the hidden door, her mind raced with the weight of what she'd discovered. She wasn't just a charity case in the Montgomery mansion, she was its rightful heir. That evening, during dinner, Emily watched Victoria with new understanding. Every graceful movement, every perfectly modulated word was part of an elaborate performance designed to hide a lifetime of calculated cruelty. The woman who had tortured her wasn't just a sadistic socialite, she was a killer who had destroyed her own father and tried to murder Emily's family. Victoria must have sensed something had changed. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Emily across the dining table, noting the slight straightening of the girl's spine, the new steadiness in her gaze. "Is something wrong, dear?" she asked, her voice honey-sweet but laced with warning. "You seem different tonight." Emily forced herself to play her part, lowering her eyes submissively. "No, Mrs. Montgomery. I'm just tired from my lessons," but beneath the table, her hands sketched furiously in her hidden notebook, documenting every new understanding of the woman who had tried to destroy her twice. Later that night, Emily added crucial details to her collection of evidence. Her artistic skill captured every document she'd discovered, every photograph that proved Victoria's crimes. But more importantly, she began drawing connections, literal lines linking the restaurant's destruction to her parents' disappearance, to her own current imprisonment. The next morning brought a new dimension to Victoria's psychological warfare. Whether she suspected Emily's discoveries or simply sensed a change, her tactics became more openly cruel. "Your grandfather's condition seems to be worsening," she mentioned casually over breakfast. "Perhaps the stress of having such a disappointing granddaughter is affecting his recovery." But Emily now understood the true meaning behind every threat. Each attempt at intimidation revealed Victoria's growing desperation to maintain control. The woman who had once seemed all-powerful now appeared increasingly brittle, her perfect mask cracking under the weight of her secrets. In her room, Emily began preparing her own counter-strategy. She created a second set of drawings, these ones designed to be found innocent sketches that maintained her facade of submission. The real evidence she hid carefully, each page a bullet in the gun she was slowly loading. The most difficult part was maintaining her pretense of ignorance around Alexander. Every time he showed her kindness, every moment they shared discussing art or literature, she had to bite back the truth that screamed to be told. He was her father, and the woman he trusted had tried to kill them both. Victoria's grip on power was built on a foundation of documents, falsified records, manipulated evidence, carefully constructed lies. But she had never counted on facing an opponent whose art could capture truth with perfect clarity, whose young mind could retain every detail of her crimes, whose very existence threatened to unravel decades of deception. In the dark heart of the mansion, two women now circled each other in a deadly dance, one armed with wealth, power, and a lifetime of practiced cruelty, the other with truth, talent, and the unshakable strength of someone who had survived Victoria's worst efforts twice before. The truth about their interconnected pasts had been discovered, but the real question remained who would survive its revelation. As Emily added the final touches to her latest drawing, a complex web showing every connection, every crime, every victim of Victoria's ambition, she knew the end game was approaching. The mansion's walls held many secrets, but soon they would echo with the sound of truth finally breaking free. Emily's art would become her weapon, her testimony, her justice. Victoria had spent decades building her house of lies, never suspecting that a child's sketchpad would become the tool of its destruction. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Los Angeles, as if nature itself was preparing for the confrontation to come. In her hidden study, Victoria reviewed her own documents, unaware that her carefully preserved evidence of past crimes had already been discovered, documented, and redrawn by the very person she had tried so hard to break. In the weeks following her discoveries, Emily transformed her artistic talent into a weapon of justice. Her hidden sketchbook became a detailed chronicle of evidence, each page meticulously documenting Victoria's crimes with photographic precision. At night, while the mansion slept, she would recreate every document she'd found, her perfect memory and skilled hands capturing every signature, every date, every damning detail. Harrison, the dismissed butler, proved to be an unexpected ally. Through carefully coded messages delivered via the grocery boy, he began supplying Emily with information about Victoria's past. His years of service had given him access to conversations and documents that filled crucial gaps in the emerging picture of Victoria's crimes. Emily's new drawings were different from her earlier work. These weren't just artistic expressions, but legal evidence created with the precision of a forensic artist. She documented the layout of Victoria's secret study, the exact locations of hidden files, the contents of each incriminating folder. Even the dimensions of the hidden door were recorded with architectural accuracy. The hospital provided another source of evidence. During her restricted visits to her grandfather, Emily began noticing patterns in his medication changes, each decline in his health coinciding with moments of her resistance to Victoria's control. She secretly photographed his medical charts with a small camera provided by Harrison, building a case for medical manipulation. Victoria's growing paranoia worked against her. She began making mistakes, leaving documents out that should have been locked away, speaking threats that were overheard by staff. Emily captured every slip in her sketchbook, creating a timeline of escalating abuse and manipulation that would be impossible to dismiss as mere imagination. The mansion's security system, intended to keep Emily trapped, became another source of evidence. She learned its patterns, documenting when cameras were active and where blind spots existed. More importantly, she discovered that the system recorded all activity, including Victoria's late-night visits to her secret study and her conversations with suspicious contacts. A breakthrough came when Emily befriended Sarah, the young daughter of one of the maids. The child could move through the mansion unnoticed, gathering dropped papers and overheard conversations. Through their secret alliance, Emily gained access to parts of the house Victoria thought secure, including the rarely used East Wing where old family records were stored. The evidence painted a pattern of systematic destruction. Victoria hadn't just orchestrated isolated crimes, she had built her entire life on a foundation of carefully planned eliminations. Each person who stood between her and her goals had been methodically removed, their destruction planned with clockmaker precision. Emily's grandfather's testimony became crucial. During his more lucid moments, she recorded his memories of Victoria's early life, the transformation he had witnessed from frustrated waitress to calculating destroyer. His words, preserved in Emily's precise handwriting, provided context that transformed seemingly unrelated events into a clear pattern of malice. The hardest evidence to gather concerned Alexander's first wife and daughter Emily's true identity. This required careful timing and calculated risks. Emily began asking innocent questions about Alexander's past, noting Victoria's reactions. Each nervous gesture, each deflection was documented, building a psychological profile that supported the physical evidence. Victoria's own vanity provided unexpected help. She had kept trophies of her successes, small items taken from each victim. Emily discovered a box containing her mother's jewelry, her father's watch, even the butterfly pendant she had worn as a small child. Each item was photographed in place, its location noted with careful precision. The staff, though terrified of Victoria, began providing subtle assistance. A dropped conversation here, a misplaced key there, small acts of rebellion that gave Emily access to new evidence. She documented each helper's contribution carefully, building a network of potential witnesses for the future. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Victoria herself. Under the strain of maintaining her facade, she began keeping a diary documenting her own thoughts and plans. Emily, during one of her careful explorations, discovered this journal and began copying its contents. The entries revealed not just past crimes, but planned future eliminations. As the evidence mounted, Emily developed a system for protecting it. Multiple copies were created and hidden throughout the mansion. Key pieces were smuggled out through Harrison's network. She even began marking the evidence with UV reactive ink, ensuring that each piece could be authenticated later. The gathering of evidence became a chess game, with Emily anticipating Victoria's moves and setting counter-traps. When Victoria installed new security cameras, Emily adjusted her documentation methods. When suspicion fell on certain staff members, she created false trails to protect her true allies. In her hidden sketchbook, Emily maintained a master index of all evidence, cross-referenced and annotated. Each piece was evaluated for its legal weight, its credibility, its potential impact. The artist in her had become an investigator, turning her observational skills to the systematic exposure of long-buried crimes. But perhaps the most powerful evidence was Emily herself. Her very existence, her undeniable resemblance to Alexander's first wife, the timing of her parents' accident, all of it formed a living testimony to Victoria's crimes. Each day, she grew stronger, more confident, more like the child she had been before Victoria's intervention. As the weeks passed, Emily's collection of evidence grew beyond just proving Victoria's crimes. It began telling a larger story of power corrupted, of lives destroyed, of a woman so consumed by ambition that she had become a monster in elegant clothing. The evidence wasn't just a weapon anymore, it was a mirror reflecting the true cost of Victoria's rise to power. In her room at night, adding the final touches to another documented piece of evidence, Emily knew she was building more than a case. She was constructing a truth so powerful that not even Victoria's wealth and influence could survive its revelation. The question wasn't if the truth would come out, but when and who else might be destroyed in its wake. The annual Montgomery Charity Gala transformed the mansion into a glittering showcase of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above Los Angeles elite as they gathered to witness Victoria's crowning achievement, the presentation of her rescued street child to society. The air was thick with expensive perfume and barely concealed curiosity. Emily stood at the top of the grand staircase, wearing a carefully chosen white dress that made her look younger and more vulnerable than her 12 years. Victoria had orchestrated every detail of her appearance, down to the deliberately ill-fitting shoes that would make it difficult for her to walk gracefully. "Remember," dear Victoria whispered, her fingers digging into Emily's shoulder. "One mistake and your grandfather might not survive the night," but for the first time, Emily didn't flinch at the threat. Hidden throughout the mansion were copies of her evidence, strategically placed where the evening's events would reveal them. The first phase of exposure began during Victoria's opening speech. As she regaled the crowd with the tale of Emily's rescue, photographs from Thompson's family diner began appearing on guests' chairs, showing a younger Victoria in a waitress uniform, standing beside her now-deceased father. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Victoria faltered mid-sentence as she noticed the photos, but quickly recovered. "And of course we must all do our Christian duty to help those less fortunate," she continued, her voice slightly strained. But more evidence was already circulating: newspaper clippings about Mr. Thompson's suspicious death, bank statements showing the systematic draining of the restaurant's accounts. Among the guests was James Morrison, a prominent investigative journalist invited by Harrison through careful manipulation of the guest list. His trained eye caught every detail: the way Victoria's composure cracked, the strategic placement of evidence, the quiet strength in Emily's bearing. The evening's entertainment included a planned exhibition of Emily's artwork. Victoria had carefully curated the pieces, selecting only those that portrayed her in a flattering light. But as the covers were removed from the easels, gasps filled the room. Instead of innocent sketches, the walls displayed meticulously detailed drawings of Victoria's crimes from the restaurant's destruction to the present day. Each piece was a masterwork of documentary evidence. Emily's artistic gift had captured every crucial detail: dates, signatures, locations. One drawing showed Victoria burning documents in her secret study. Another depicted her threatening staff members. The most damning was a portrait of her standing over Alexander's first wife's car, adjusting the brake lines. Victoria's reaction was instant and violent. She lunged for the nearest drawing, but her movement only drew more attention to the evidence. "These are lies," she shrieked, her carefully maintained composure shattering. This ungrateful little witch is trying to destroy me." The crowd drew back, shocked by the transformation. Gone was the elegant socialite. In her place stood a woman consumed by rage and fear. Her designer dress was askew, her perfect makeup cracking along with her sanity. Emily's voice cut through the chaos, clear and steady. "Everything I've drawn is truth. Every detail can be verified. Victoria Thompson didn't just destroy her father's restaurant, she's been destroying lives for 20 years. More evidence appeared as servants, coordinated by Harrison, began distributing folders to key guests. Medical records showing the manipulation of Emily's grandfather's care. Security footage of Victoria's late-night meetings with suspicious characters. The deathbed confession of Mr. Thompson, documenting his daughter's betrayal. The final blow came when Emily revealed her most powerful piece of evidence, a DNA test proving her true identity as Catherine Montgomery, Alexander's lost daughter. The gasps of recognition swept through the crowd as guests noticed her resemblance to the family portraits hanging on the walls. Victoria, seeing her carefully constructed world crumbling, made one last desperate attempt to regain control. She grabbed Emily, pressing a letter opener to her throat. "Nobody move," she commanded, but her voice shook with hysteria. "I won't let you destroy everything I've built." The room froze in horror, but Emily remained calm. She knew this moment was coming, had planned for it. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a final piece of evidence, Victoria's own diary, documenting every crime in her own handwriting. "It's over," Emily said softly. "The truth doesn't need violence to be heard." The letter opener trembled against her throat as Victoria realized the completeness of her defeat. Security guards, quietly summoned by Harrison, moved through the crowd. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Victoria's perfectly planned charity gala had become the stage for her own exposure, each glittering guest a witness to her downfall. As the police entered the mansion, Victoria's grip on reality finally shattered. She began laughing, a high, broken sound that echoed through the silent ballroom. "You're just like me," she whispered in Emily's ear, "playing everyone like pieces on a board." But Emily shook her head. "No, Victoria, I learned from you, but I chose a different path. I chose truth over lies, justice over revenge." The letter opener clattered to the floor as Victoria's strength finally gave out. The guests watched in stunned silence as Los Angeles' most celebrated socialite was led away in handcuffs, her mascara leaving black trails down her perfectly powdered cheeks. The charity gala had indeed showcased a transformation, just not the one Victoria had planned. Victoria's breakdown unfolded like a Greek tragedy before Los Angeles elite. As police officers approached to arrest her, she broke free from their grasp and ran to the center of the ballroom. Her perfectly coiffed hair had come undone, and her designer dress was torn at the shoulder, a physical manifestation of her crumbling facade. "You don't understand," she screamed, her voice bouncing off the marble floors. "I had to do it. I deserved more than serving coffee in that pathetic restaurant." The guests drew back, watching in horrified fascination as their society queen transformed into something raw and desperate. Emily stood quietly by the evidence wall, her artwork telling the story that Victoria was now confirming with every hysterical word. Each confession that spilled from Victoria's lips matched a drawing. Each wild gesture corresponded to a documented crime. "My father was weak," Victoria continued, spinning to face her audience. "He would have kept us in that diner forever. And Sarah Montgomery, she didn't deserve Alexander. None of you deserve what you have." Her mascara-stained face contorted with years of suppressed rage and resentment. The breakdown accelerated as Victoria began addressing specific guests, revealing their secrets that she had collected over years of careful observation. "Judge Williams, how's your mistress in Palm Springs? Mrs. Harrison, does your husband know about the gambling debts?" Each revelation was a desperate attempt to drag others down with her. Emily watched as Victoria's power, built on blackmail and manipulation, crumbled with each exposure. The society people who had once feared Victoria now looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. The spell was broken. The Empress had no clothes. Then Victoria focused her attention on Emily, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think you've won? You're just a child playing with things you don't understand. I killed your mother. I watched her car go over that cliff. I heard her scream." Her words echoed through the silent ballroom. But instead of breaking down, Emily stepped forward, her voice steady. "I know what you did, Victoria. Every detail, every plan, every murder. But you forgot something important. Art shows truth in a way that can't be denied, and I've captured every truth about you." Victoria lunged at the evidence wall, tearing at the drawings, but it was too late. Photographs of her crimes were already circulating through the crowd, copies of documents were being read by influential guests, and video evidence was playing on screens throughout the mansion. "I made myself," Victoria screamed, ripping a drawing to shreds. "I created this life. I earned it. That restaurant, that miserable little life, it wasn't enough. It was never enough." Her words became increasingly incoherent as she relived each crime, each calculation, each betrayal. The police moved in again, but Victoria had one final card to play. She pulled out a small vial from her clutch. "This is what I gave your mother's break lines," she told Emily, her smile grotesque. "Want to see how it works?" She raised the vial to her lips. Quick action from the police prevented her from drinking the poison, but the attempt itself was the final confirmation of her guilt. As they handcuffed her, Victoria began laughing, a high, broken sound that contained no humor, only the release of decades of carefully maintained pretense. "You're all just like me," she called out to the stunned crowd. "All of you. Playing your roles, wearing your masks. I just played the game better." Her voice cracked on the last word, dissolving into sobs that shook her entire body. Emily's grandfather, brought to the gala as part of the plan, watched from his wheelchair as the woman who had destroyed his best friend's family finally faced justice. Tears streamed down his face as he reached for Emily's hand, witnessing the completion of a circle that had begun decades ago. Victoria's final moments in the mansion were captured by dozens of phones. The mighty socialite, hair wild, makeup smeared, being led away in handcuffs through the same grand entrance she had once ruled over. Her screams echoed through the marble halls. "I should have killed you too. I should have made sure." But Emily's reply cut through the chaos. "You tried to teach me that power comes from fear and control. Instead, you taught me that truth is the greatest power of all." The words seemed to break something final in Victoria, and she sagged in the officer's grip. As police escorted Victoria out, the evidence of her crimes remained on display. Emily's artwork telling the story that would dominate Los Angeles society for months to come. Each drawing was a chapter in the fall of a woman who had sacrificed everything, including her own humanity, in pursuit of power. The guests began to leave, their whispered conversations already spreading the story across the city. The charity gala had indeed showcased a transformation, but not the one Victoria had planned. Instead of presenting her triumph, it had documented her descent into madness and defeat. In the empty ballroom, Emily stood looking at her artwork not with satisfaction, but with a deep understanding of the price of justice. Victoria's breakdown had exposed not just her crimes, but the hollow nature of the life she had built on lies and betrayal. The sound of sirens faded into the distance, carrying away the woman who had tried to destroy Emily twice, but her presence lingered in the mansion like a dark shadow, a reminder that the most dangerous monsters often hide behind the most beautiful masks. Alexander Montgomery's arrival at the gala came at the precise moment Victoria was being led away in handcuffs. He stood frozen in the mansion's doorway, his business trip cut short by anonymous evidence sent to his office, watching as his wife of 5 years transformed into a stranger before his eyes. Alexander, Victoria's scream cut through the chaos as she spotted him. "Tell them they're wrong. Tell them I did it all for us." She struggled against the officers, her designer dress now completely torn, her face a mask of running mascara and desperate pleading. But Alexander's attention was fixed on Emily, standing quietly by her wall of evidence. In that moment, all the pieces fell into place: her artistic talent. So like Sarah's, her gentle strength, a mirror of Catherine's, the familiar tilt of her head that had haunted his dreams for 20 years. Catherine, his voice broke on the name as he stepped toward her. My little butterfly, the nickname, unspoken for 2 decades, brought tears to Emily's eyes. She reached into her dress and pulled out the butterfly pendant, the one piece of jewelry Victoria hadn't managed to steal from her. Victoria's howl of rage echoed through the ballroom as she watched father and daughter move toward each other. She's lying. She's nothing but a street rat I took in out of pity. I made you forget them. I gave you a new life. Her words tumbled out, each confession more damning than the last. Alexander's face hardened as he turned to his wife. You didn't make me forget, Victoria. You used my grief, my vulnerability. You manipulated everything: my companies, my charities, my life. His voice grew stronger with each word. But worse than that, you tried to kill my daughter. Twice. The evidence wall told the story in devastating detail. Emily's artistic skill had captured every aspect of Victoria's crimes: the tampering with Sarah's car, the forged documents, the systematic destruction of Alexander's business empire. Each drawing was a testimony to years of calculated cruelty. Look at her artwork, Victoria, Alexander commanded, his voice tight with controlled fury. My daughter inherited her mother's gift for capturing truth. Every stroke of her pencil reveals who you really are. He picked up a particular drawing, one showing Victoria in her waitress uniform, planning her father's destruction. Victoria's composure cracked completely. You don't understand. That restaurant was a prison. My father was weak, pathetic. I deserved more. She lunged forward suddenly, breaking free from the officers, reaching for Emily with clawed hands. I should have pushed you off that cliff myself. Alexander moved with unexpected speed, placing himself between Victoria and Emily. You won't touch my daughter again, he declared, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years of buried grief and rage. Every moment you spent destroying lives, she spent surviving, creating, holding on to her humanity. The police regained control of Victoria, but she continued her tirade. I made myself into everything you wanted. I became perfect. How dare you choose her over me? Her voice rose to a shriek that shattered the last illusion of sophistication she had maintained. Emily stepped forward, still holding the butterfly pendant. You tried to teach me that love is weakness, Victoria. But love is what saved me. Love is what helped me survive everything you did. Her quiet words seemed to affect Victoria more than any shouting could have. The paintings, Victoria whispered, her eyes wild. The ones in Sarah's studio, they showed everything. I had to stop her. She was going to expose me. This confession, perhaps her most damning, brought a new wave of grief to Alexander's face as he finally learned the true reason for his first wife's death. As Victoria was finally led away, her screams fading into the night, Alexander turned to Emily. His hands shook as he touched the butterfly pendant. I gave this to you on your 5th birthday, he said softly. The last time I saw you wear it was the day before. He couldn't finish the sentence. Emily touched his hand gently. I never forgot, she whispered. Even when I couldn't remember everything, I kept drawing butterflies. They reminded me of feeling safe, of being loved. She opened her sketchbook to show him pages of butterfly drawings, each one a piece of their shared past struggling to emerge. The remaining guests had fallen silent, witnessing the reunion of father and daughter against the backdrop of Victoria's evidence wall. The contrast was stark: love and truth prevailing over hatred and deception, art triumphing over artifice. Alexander gathered Emily into his arms, his tears falling freely now. I searched for you for so long, he said, his voice rough with emotion. And you were right here, fighting a battle I couldn't even see. He looked at the evidence wall with new understanding. You didn't just expose Victoria's crimes, you set us all free. As father and daughter stood together, Emily's grandfather joined them. completing the circle of family that Victoria had tried so hard to destroy. The mansion, once Victoria's fortress of lies, began to feel different, as if truth and love were already cleansing away 2 decades of darkness. The night that was meant to be Victoria's triumph had become instead a testament to the power of art, truth, and the unbreakable bonds of family. As the police cars drove away with their prisoner, Emily picked up her pencil one last time, beginning a new drawing not of darkness and deception, but of healing and hope. In the quiet aftermath of Victoria's arrest, the Montgomery mansion began yielding deeper, darker secrets. As police forensics teams combed through Victoria's hidden study, they discovered a vault behind the Monet painting. Inside lay the complete truth about the night Sarah Montgomery died. Sarah's final paintings, preserved by Victoria as trophies, told a story more tragic than anyone had imagined. The artwork showed Victoria's early days at Thompson's Diner, documenting her systematic destruction of her father's business. Sarah, with an artist's eye for detail, had captured everything: the forged documents, the secret meetings, the calculated manipulation. "Your mother saw the truth about Victoria before anyone else," Alexander explained to Emily as they examined the paintings together. "She was going to expose everything, to save Victoria's father." His voice broke as he realized how his first wife's compassion had led to her death. She wanted to help, and it cost her her life. The most devastating revelation came from a hidden diary, not Victoria's, but Sarah's. The final entry, dated the day before her death, revealed that she had discovered she was pregnant with their second child. Victoria hadn't just murdered Sarah, she had destroyed an entire future, a sibling Emily would never know. Emily's grandfather, James Winters, added another layer to the tragedy. He revealed that he had been more than just Mr. Thompson's friend. He had been Victoria's godfather, chosen to protect her if anything happened to her father. His voice shook as he described watching Victoria transform from a troubled young woman into someone capable of patricide. "I tried to stop her," he said, tears rolling down his weathered face. "The day she forged her father's signature, I confronted her, but she threatened to destroy my art gallery, to ruin everything I'd built. I was a coward. I should have spoken up, should have stopped her before she hurt anyone else." The investigation revealed that Victoria's hatred of Emily went beyond her connection to the restaurant. Emily's artistic talent, so similar to Sarah's, had been a constant reminder of the woman who had almost exposed Victoria's true nature. Every time Emily drew, she unknowingly recreated the threat that Victoria had killed to eliminate. Alexander discovered that his own blindness to Victoria's nature had roots in carefully orchestrated manipulation. She had used his grief over Sarah and Catherine's disappearance, feeding him subtle doses of medication that kept him compliant and unfocused. The evidence was there in his blood work, years of chemical manipulation designed to keep him from seeing the truth. The most heartbreaking discovery came from Emily's early childhood medical records. After the attempt on her life, she had been found by a hiking couple and taken to a rural hospital. Post-traumatic amnesia had erased her memory of being Catherine Montgomery, and in the confusion of the emergency room she had been listed as an unidentified orphan. "I drew butterflies," Emily whispered, looking at her old sketchbooks. "Over and over I drew butterflies, but I didn't know why. It was my mind trying to remember the pendant, trying to remember you." She clutched the butterfly necklace that had been her only link to her true identity. The police investigation uncovered more victims of Victoria's rise to power, other families destroyed, other lives ruined. Each revelation was another weight added to the shoulders of those who had survived her machinations. The tragedy wasn't just in the lives lost, but in the web of pain that had spread out from Victoria's single-minded pursuit of power. Harrison, the former butler, provided the final piece of the tragic puzzle. He had served the Montgomery family since before Catherine's birth, and his loyalty to Sarah had made him Victoria's enemy from the start. She had systematically worked to discredit him, finally forcing his resignation when he began to recognize Emily's true identity. As the full scope of Victoria's crimes emerged, the tragedy of wasted potential became clear. She had possessed intelligence, determination, and charm, all turned to destructive purposes. The same energy spent destroying lives could have built something meaningful, could have honored her father's legacy rather than destroying it. In Emily's room, her artwork now told a different story. Alongside the evidence of Victoria's crimes, she began drawing portraits of the family she had lost and found again: Sarah's gentle smile, her father's kind eyes, the brother or sister she would never know. Each picture was an act of reclaiming, of healing, of understanding the depth of what Victoria had tried to destroy. The tragedy lay not just in what was lost, but in what could have been a family whole and happy, a legacy of kindness rather than cruelty, a life built on love instead of hatred. Victoria's final act of destruction came not in the courthouse or prison, but in the quiet confines of the hospital psychiatric ward where she awaited trial. The doctors had diagnosed her with severe personality disorders, but none had anticipated the depths of her capacity for one last act of vengeance. Through a network of loyal servants still embedded in the Montgomery household, Victoria managed to smuggle out one final letter. It was addressed to Alexander, but its contents were designed to shatter the fragile peace his reunited family had found. The letter began with a confession that chilled Alexander to his core. "Your precious Sarah" wasn't the first Victoria wrote. There were others before her, others who saw too much, knew too much. Did you never wonder why no one came forward about Thompson's diner? Why no former employees ever spoke up? Emily found her father in his study, the letter trembling in his hands. The details Victoria provided were horrific: names, dates, locations of other victims who had crossed her path and disappeared. Each revelation was a fresh wound, each confession a new burden of guilt for those who hadn't stopped her sooner. "But my masterpiece," Victoria's letter continued, "was making you fall in love with me while your wife's blood was still fresh on my hands. Every kiss, every tender moment I was laughing inside, thinking of how easily you were manipulated." The psychiatric ward reported that Victoria appeared calm as she wrote the letter, even peaceful. No one suspected that she had also managed to obtain a small but lethal dose of poison. She waited until the letter had been smuggled out before taking it, ensuring that her final act would coincide with her words being read. When the guards found her, she was sitting at her desk, a satisfied smile frozen on her face. Beside her lay a final note: "You can't heal what I've broken. Every happy moment will be tainted by knowing how completely I fooled you. I win." The news of Victoria's suicide reached the Montgomery mansion just as Alexander finished reading her letter. Emily found him collapsed in his chair, the weight of 2 decades of manipulation finally breaking through his carefully maintained composure. "She's still hurting us," Emily whispered, holding her father's hand. "Even now, she's trying to poison our happiness." The truth of Victoria's words was like acid, eating away at every memory, making them question every moment of the past 20 years. The investigation into Victoria's claims revealed the full extent of her network. Former employees of Thompson's diner had been systematically silenced, some through bribes, others through blackmail, and some through more permanent means. Each discovery added to the weight of collective guilt carried by those who had survived her. Emily's grandfather suffered a severe stroke upon learning of Victoria's final revelations. The knowledge that he had been her godfather, that he had watched her first steps toward darkness and failed to stop her, proved too much for his already fragile health. In the hospital, as James Winters lay connected to machines, Emily held his hand and tried to share her strength. "It's not your fault," she told him repeatedly. She fooled everyone. She spent her whole life perfecting the art of deception. But the damage Victoria had intended was already spreading. Alexander began drinking heavily, tortured by memories of intimate moments with the woman who had murdered his first wife. Emily would find him in his study late at night, staring at old photographs, trying to see any sign of the monster behind Victoria's perfect smile. The servants who had helped Victoria smuggle out her final letter were arrested, But the damage was done. The household was torn apart by suspicion. No one knew who else might have been part of Victoria's network. Who else might be waiting to carry out some final act of revenge? Emily's art, once her source of strength and truth-telling, became painful to practice. Each time she picked up a pencil, she remembered Victoria's words about Sarah's paintings, about how artistic talent had signed her mother's death warrant. The tragedy of Victoria's final act lay not in her death, but in how effectively she had poisoned the future. Even in death, she had found a way to taint the joy of the family's reunion, to cast shadows over their attempts to heal and rebuild. As Emily sat beside her grandfather's hospital bed, sketching his peaceful face while he slept, she realized that Victoria's true victory wasn't in the lives she had taken, but in the trust she had destroyed. The question that haunted them all was whether love could truly overcome such calculated malice, whether healing was possible in the face of such deliberate destruction. The cost of exposing Victoria's crimes proved steeper than anyone had anticipated. In the weeks following her death, the ripple effects of her final act of destruction spread through Los Angeles society like poison through water, touching lives far beyond the Montgomery family. The first casualty was Alexander's business empire. As Victoria's network of corruption was exposed, investors fled, contracts were cancelled, and the carefully built Montgomery legacy began to crumble. The same social circles that had once celebrated Victoria's elegance now whispered about scandal and shame, taking a perverse delight in the family's fall from grace. Emily watched helplessly as her father aged years in weeks, his shoulders bending under the weight of public scrutiny and private guilt. The media circus was relentless, digging up every detail of Victoria's crimes and Alexander's perceived blindness to them. Headlines screamed about the socialite killer and Montgomery's murderous marriage. The mansion, once a symbol of power and privilege, became a prison of memories. Every room held echoes of Victoria's presence, her perfectly arranged flowers, her carefully chosen artwork, her lingering perfume. The staff, though loyal, jumped at shadows, haunted by their own complicity or silence during her reign of terror. James Winter's condition deteriorated rapidly in the hospital. The doctors spoke of recovery chances, but Emily recognized the truth in her grandfather's eyes. He had lost the will to fight. The guilt of his role in Victoria's early life, of not stopping her when he had the chance, was proving more fatal than any physical ailment. "I should have seen it," he whispered to Emily during one of his lucid moments. "When she was young, there were signs. But I thought love could save her. I thought if we just loved her enough." His voice trailed off, lost in memories of a little girl who had grown into a monster. The worst blow came when Sarah's family emerged from anonymity. Their lawyer presented a civil suit against the Montgomery estate, claiming Alexander's negligence had contributed to their daughter's death. The legal battle threatened to drain what remained of the family's resources, turning grief into a public spectacle. Emily's own healing process stalled. Her art, once vibrant with color and life, turned dark and twisted. Her sketchbook filled with shadowy figures and broken butterflies, reflecting the trauma she couldn't express in words. Night terrors returned, filling her sleep with images of Victoria's final smile, her last act of vengeance playing out endlessly. The price of revenge extended beyond the family. Harrison, the loyal butler who had helped expose Victoria's crimes, found himself blacklisted from service positions throughout Los Angeles. Victoria's network, even in death, worked to punish those who had betrayed her. Alexander started receiving anonymous letters, each containing a new revelation about Victoria's crimes. Some were true, others clearly false, but each forced him to question another memory, another moment of their shared life. The psychological torture continued even after her death, exactly as she had planned. The charity organizations associated with the Montgomery name began to collapse. Donations dried up, board members resigned, and the good work of years was undone in weeks. Victoria had ensured that her fall would take down not just her enemies, but every positive legacy the family had built. In the hospital, Emily spent hours at her grandfather's bedside, trying to capture his fading spirit in her drawings. But even this act of love was tainted by Victoria's influence. Each sketch reminded her of Sarah's final paintings, of how artistic truth had led to her mother's death. The media frenzy reached its peak when a true crime documentary began production, promising to reveal the inside story of Victoria's rise and fall. Former servants, society friends, and distant relatives emerged from nowhere, each claiming special insight into the twisted psychology of the socialite killer. Emily's true identity as Catherine Montgomery, once a source of joy and reunion, became another weapon in the public's arsenal. Conspiracy theories spread about why she had hidden for so long, whether she was really who she claimed to be, whether the whole story was an elaborate hoax. The price of revenge was measured not just in dollars and reputation, but in the quiet moments of doubt that crept into even the strongest family bonds. Each victory over Victoria seemed hollow in the face of what it had cost: peace, trust, innocence. Late at night, in the silence of her room, Emily would hold her butterfly pendant and wonder if exposing the truth had been worth the price. Victoria was gone, justice had been served, but the cost of that justice threatened to destroy everything and everyone she had fought to protect. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 months after Victoria's death. Emily was helping to clear out Victoria's private study when she discovered a loose panel behind the antique desk. Inside was a small, leather-bound diary, not Victoria's calculated confessions, but the private journal of her father, Robert Thompson. The diary's pages, yellowed with age and spotted with coffee stains, told a story that changed everything. Robert Thompson had known about Victoria's darkness, had watched it grow, and had spent his final years trying to save not just his daughter, but everyone around her. "My Victoria was born during the great storm," the first entry read. Perhaps that should have been a sign she came into this world fighting, screaming her defiance at everything and everyone. But she wasn't always what she became. There was a moment, a turning point, when everything changed. Emily sat on the study floor, reading through the night. The diary revealed that Victoria had been adopted, rescued from an abusive household at age 3. Robert and his wife had chosen her, loved her, tried to heal the trauma she had experienced in those early years. Her obsession with power and control had roots in a past far darker than anyone had imagined. "She was such a beautiful child," Robert wrote, "but she carried shadows inside her that no amount of love seemed to reach. The doctors called it reactive attachment disorder, said she'd never learn to trust or form normal bonds. We thought love would be enough. We were wrong." The most shocking revelation came halfway through the diary. Victoria's biological mother had been found and had attempted to reclaim her. The legal battle that followed had broken something in young Victoria's psyche. She had learned then that love could be used as a weapon, that families could be torn apart by paperwork and signatures. After the court case, Robert wrote, "She changed completely. Every act of kindness became suspect in her eyes. Every expression of love became a potential weapon to be used against her. She began studying people, learning to manipulate them, building walls around herself made of other people's weaknesses." Emily's hands trembled as she read about Victoria's teenage years. Robert had documented everything: her first manipulations, her growing skill at playing people against each other, her careful cultivation of a perfect public image that hid the darkness within. "I know what she's planning," one of the final entries read. "I've seen the forged documents, noticed the missing money. My daughter is going to destroy everything we've built, not because she hates me, but because she needs to prove that love is always a lie. I should stop her. But perhaps this is my final failure. As a father, I love her too much to destroy her, even to save others from what she's become." The diary's most poignant passages were Robert's attempts to understand and help his daughter. He had arranged therapy, sought expert advice, even planned to confront her about her crimes. But his final illness had come too quickly, and Victoria had used it to accelerate her plans. Emily found Alexander in his study, the diary clutched to her chest. "You need to read this," she said softly. "It doesn't excuse anything she did, but it helps explain why she was so broken, why she could never accept love or trust." As they read together, a new understanding emerged. Victoria's cruelty hadn't been born of simple evil, it was the product of profound trauma, of a child's desperate attempt to never be vulnerable again. Her inability to trust love had driven her to destroy every genuine relationship she encountered. She saw my art as a threat, Emily realized, not just because it could expose her crimes, but because it represented everything she couldn't understand: the ability to see and create beauty, to trust in something beyond control and power. The final pages of Robert Thompson's diary contained a father's last attempt to reach his daughter. He had written her a letter, never delivered, begging her to remember the love that had chosen her, that had tried to heal her, that had never given up hope, even in the face of her darkness. Emily added the diary to her growing collection of evidence, but this piece wasn't about exposing crimes. It was about understanding the complex tragedy that had shaped their lives. Victoria hadn't been born a monster, she had been created by a perfect storm of trauma, fear, and the failure of love to heal deep enough wounds. That night, Emily began a new drawing, not of Victoria the monster, but of Victoria the broken child, holding a shattered mirror that reflected both her past and her future. It was perhaps her most powerful piece yet, capturing not just the truth of what had happened, but the deeper truth of why. The truth about Thompson's family diner emerged gradually, like an old photograph developing in darkroom chemicals. Through Robert Thompson's diary, interviews with former employees, and long-buried records, a very different picture of Victoria's early life began to take shape. The diner hadn't been the prison Victoria had claimed, but rather a sanctuary carefully crafted by Robert Thompson to heal his adopted daughter. Each element had been chosen with purpose: the warm lighting to combat her fear of darkness, the family-style seating to help her learn trust, the open kitchen design to show her that love and nurturing could be transparent and unconditional. Dad created that place for her. Marcus Chen, the diner's former chef, revealed during his testimony. Everything from the comfort food menu to the regular customers who treated her like family, it was all part of his therapy for Victoria. He called it healing through belonging. Emily discovered photos showing the diner's evolution. Early images captured Victoria as a frightened child, hiding behind counters. Later ones showed her beginning to smile, to interact with customers, to experience moments of genuine connection. The transformation had been slow but real until the day her biological mother reappeared. The legal battle for Victoria's custody had turned the diner from a haven into a battleground. Court documents revealed how her biological mother had used the restaurant's modest income as evidence that Robert couldn't provide adequately for Victoria. The threat of losing her adopted family had triggered Victoria's darkest instincts. She started changing after that first court hearing, Sarah Palmer, a longtime waitress, recalled. It was like watching a flower close up and grow thorns. She began studying the customers, learning their secrets, figuring out how to make them need her in ways that couldn't be taken away. Robert's diary detailed his heartbreaking attempts to reach his daughter during this period. He had invested every spare dollar in therapy, counseling, and programs designed to help traumatized children. The diner's financial struggles weren't from mismanagement, but from a father's desperate attempts to save his daughter's soul. The most devastating revelation came from the diner's account books. Victoria's systematic destruction of the business hadn't been about escaping a humble life, it had been about destroying the evidence of a time when she had been genuinely loved. Each act of sabotage had targeted specific memories: the booth, where she had first laughed, the kitchen where she had learned to bake, the counter where customers had celebrated her birthdays. Emily's grandfather, James Winters, added crucial context from his hospital bed. Robert knew what Victoria was doing to the diner, he whispered. But he let it happen because he thought if she destroyed it herself, she might finally exhaust her need to prove love couldn't last. He died still believing she could heal. The investigation uncovered Victoria's early attempts at manipulation, small at first, like convincing customers to change their regular orders just to prove she could, then escalating to orchestrating conflicts between staff members. The diner had become her testing ground for the skills she would later use to destroy lives. But amidst the darkness, evidence of Robert's unwavering love continued to surface. He had maintained a special savings account for Victoria's future, even as she was systematically destroying his business. Every major event in her life was documented in his diary, celebrated even as he watched her slip further into darkness. The diner was never about the money Robert had written in one of his final entries. It was about creating a place where Victoria could learn that love doesn't have to hurt, that family can be chosen, that belonging doesn't require perfection. Even as she tears it apart, I want her to remember that this place will always represent the love that chose her. The truth transformed the narrative of Victoria's crimes. She hadn't been a simple social climber destroying her humble beginnings. She had been a traumatized soul systematically erasing every piece of evidence that love could be real, genuine, and unconditional. Emily captured this revelation in a new series of drawings. Each piece showed the diner from a different perspective, through Robert's eyes as a place of healing, through Victoria's eyes as a threat to her carefully constructed walls, through the community's eyes as a place where broken people could find belonging. The final piece of evidence was a simple photograph found behind the diner's counter. Victoria, on her 16th birthday, genuinely smiling as Robert presented her with a homemade cake. The moment captured in that image represented everything she had tried to destroy, everything she had lost, and everything that might have been if fear hadn't won the battle for her soul. The most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source, a DNA database that Alexander had been using to trace his lost daughter's lineage. The results that arrived one morning shattered everyone's understanding of the tragedy they had lived through. Victoria Thompson and Sarah Montgomery had been half-sisters, sharing the same biological father. Neither had known of the other's existence, a secret their father had taken to his grave. This genetic connection explained the uncanny resemblance between Victoria and Sarah's artwork, their similar mannerisms, and their shared gift for seeing beneath surfaces. "Your mother and Victoria were connected by blood," Alexander explained to Emily, his voice trembling as he read the report. "Sarah must have sensed it somehow. That's why she kept trying to help Victoria, even when she suspected something was wrong. She was reaching out to a sister she never knew she had." The discovery cast Victoria's actions in an even more tragic light. She had destroyed her own sister, the one person who might have understood her trauma, who might have helped her heal. The paintings Sarah had created, the ones that had sealed her fate, hadn't just been evidence of crimes, they had been attempts to understand and save a sister she never knew she had. Emily's grandfather provided the missing pieces of the story. He had known both girls as children, though at different times and in different contexts. Victoria at the diner, angry and defensive, and Sarah at art classes, gentle and nurturing. He had never connected the similarities, never suspected the genetic truth that bound them together. "I should have seen it," he whispered from his hospital bed. The way they both poured their souls into art, the way they could capture truth on paper. They were mirror images of each other, one turned toward light, one toward darkness. The investigation revealed more connections. Victoria's biological mother's attempt to reclaim her had coincided with Sarah's first success as an artist. While one sister was losing her sense of family, the other was finding her voice through art. Their paths had been destined to cross, though neither knew the true nature of their connection. Emily found herself drawing both women together, Sarah with her butterflies and light, Victoria with her shadows and thorns. The sisters who never knew they were sisters, whose lives had tangled in the most tragic way possible. Her art captured the moment they might have shared if truth had come to light sooner. The revelation explained Victoria's obsessive hatred of Emily's art. She had recognized in her niece the same talent that had bound her to her unknown sister, the same ability to see and capture truth. Every time Emily drew, she had unknowingly channeled both her mother's gift and her aunt's torment. Alexander discovered letters in Sarah's old studio, unopened messages she had planned to send to Victoria, reaching out to the woman who had caught her attention at social events. Sarah had sensed their connection, had wanted to mentor the ambitious young woman who reminded her so much of herself. The letters had never been sent, their potential for healing lost to time and tragedy. The DNA results also revealed that Emily had inherited a rare genetic marker found in exceptionally gifted artists. This trait had come down through both Sarah and Victoria's bloodline, expressing itself in their shared ability to capture not just images but emotions and hidden truths in their work. 3 generations of artists, Alexander mused, watching Emily sketch, each with the power to see beneath surfaces, to capture truth in ways others couldn't. Sarah used it to heal, Victoria to destroy, and now you, Emily, use it to reveal. The final piece of the puzzle came from Robert Thompson's diary. He had suspected the connection between Victoria and Sarah, had even planned to tell them the truth. But Victoria's escalating behavior had made him fear the revelation would push her completely over the edge. He had died carrying this secret, hoping that love would be enough to prevent tragedy. Emily created her most powerful work, yet a triptych showing the 3 women bound by blood and art. Sarah with her butterflies and hope, Victoria with her thorns and fear, and Emily herself, carrying both legacies forward. The piece captured the complexity of their shared heritage, the potential for both creation and destruction inherent in their gift. The truth of their family ties didn't excuse Victoria's crimes, but it added a layer of Greek tragedy to the story. 3 women bound by blood and art, whose lives had tangled in the most devastating way possible. The revelation left everyone questioning fate, free will, and the terrible price of secrets kept too long. The final chapter of Victoria's story was written not in her death, but in what she left behind. A week after her suicide, a package arrived at the Montgomery mansion, a comprehensive confession and evidence that would save Alexander's business empire. Victoria's last act hadn't been the poisoned letter she'd sent, but rather a carefully prepared set of documents that exposed her entire network of corruption while protecting the innocent. She had documented every criminal connection, every fraudulent transaction, and provided evidence that cleared Alexander of any wrongdoing. More surprisingly, she had liquidated her secret accounts and transferred the funds to a trust for child abuse victims. The accompanying letter revealed a moment of clarity in her final hours. I cannot undo what I've done, but perhaps I can prevent others from becoming what I became. The abused child I once was deserves this, even if the woman I became does not. The trust included specific provisions for art therapy programs inspired by both Sarah's teaching work and Emily's healing through art. Victoria had finally recognized the power of creativity to heal what she had never been able to fix in herself. Her final letter to Emily was different from the vengeful messages she'd sent before. "You have your mother's gift," she wrote, "not just for art, but for seeing truth and choosing light over darkness. I couldn't destroy that in you, no matter how hard I tried. Perhaps that's what redemption looks like, failing to extinguish the very light you once had yourself." The package included one last item, a small, worn photograph of Victoria as a child at Thompson's diner, genuinely smiling as her adopted father taught her to bake. On the back, in shaking handwriting, were her final words, "There was love once. I just forgot how to feel it." Emily added this photograph to her collection of truth-telling art, but with a different perspective now. Her final portrait of Victoria showed both versions of her aunt, the wounded child, and the woman she became, reaching toward each other across an unbridgeable divide. The redemption wasn't complete, couldn't be, given the lives Victoria had destroyed, but in her final act, she had chosen to protect rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was something close to understanding. Spring arrived in Los Angeles, bringing with it signs of renewal to the Montgomery mansion. Emily's artwork underwent a transformation, moving from documenting darkness to capturing moments of healing and hope. Her new series, Light Through Shadows, told the story not just of survival, but of flourishing despite trauma. The first major change came with her grandfather's recovery. James Winters, inspired by Emily's strength and Victoria's final attempt at redemption, found the will to fight his way back to health. Together, they reopened his art gallery, transforming it into a space for young artists who, like Emily, used art to process trauma and pain. Alexander, freed from the weight of suspicion by Victoria's final confession, threw himself into supporting Emily's healing journey. He converted Victoria's secret study into a sun-filled art studio, where father and daughter spent hours together, Emily teaching him to see the world through an artist's eyes while he shared stories of Sarah's own artistic journey. The healing spread beyond the family. Emily started an art therapy program for children in the foster system, understanding deeply how creativity could help process pain that words couldn't express. Her own experiences became a bridge to help others find their voice through art. Her most powerful work was a series of portraits titled The Three Sisters Sarah, Victoria and herself, bound by blood and art, but choosing different paths. The exhibition opened at her grandfather's gallery, drawing crowds who found their own healing in the honest portrayal of trauma and recovery. Thompson's Diner was purchased and restored by the Montgomery Foundation, transformed into a community center offering art classes and support groups for traumatized children. Emily painted a mural on its walls showing butterflies emerging from shadows, a testament to both healing and transformation. The butterfly pendant that had survived so much became a symbol of the program, the butterfly effect they called it, recognizing how small acts of kindness or cruelty could ripple out to affect countless lives. Each child in the program received their own butterfly pendant, a reminder that beauty could emerge from darkness. Emily's own healing came not from forgetting, but from transforming her experiences into something that could help others. Her art no longer served just as evidence of crimes, but as proof that survival itself could be an art form, that healing could be as creative an act as any painting. Through her work with other trauma survivors, Emily found what Victoria had spent her life searching for, the understanding that pain didn't have to define you, that love could be trusted, and that family could be both born and chosen. 1 year after Victoria's death, the Montgomery mansion hosted a very different kind of gathering. The formal gardens, once showcasing Victoria's rigid perfection, bloomed with wildflowers and butterflies. The occasion was both a celebration of healing and an official adoption ceremony, Emily legally becoming Catherine Emily Montgomery Winters, honoring both her past and present. Alexander and James Winters stood together, former father-in-law and son-in-law united by their love for Emily and their shared journey through darkness to light. The guest list included survivors from Victoria's reign of terror, each bringing stories of recovery and renewal. Harrison, the loyal butler, had returned to his position, his presence a symbol of trust restored. The ceremony combined legal formality with artistic expression. Emily had created individual butterflies for each guest, each one carrying a message of hope or healing. The mansion's walls, once displaying Victoria's carefully curated art collection, now showcased Emily's journey from survival to triumph, telling a story of transformation rather than tragedy. Thompson's Diner, now the Butterfly Effect Community Center, catered the event with comfort food made from Robert Thompson's original recipes. Each dish served as a reminder that something nurturing could rise from the ashes of destruction. The center's first graduating class of young artists presented their works, their pieces displayed alongside Emily's in a testament to the power of creative healing. The most touching moment came when Alexander presented Emily with a new butterfly pendant, this one crafted from melted down pieces of both Sarah's original jewelry and Victoria's final tokens of redemption. "The past is part of us," he said, "but it doesn't define our future." James Winters, standing strong after his recovery, unveiled his own surprise, a scholarship fund for young artists, named in honor of both Sarah and Victoria. "Art can hurt or heal," he announced. "We choose to use it for healing." As evening fell, the gathered family and friends released hundreds of butterflies into the garden. Each carried a small light, creating a living constellation of hope against the darkening sky. The moment captured everything they had learned: that darkness could be transformed, that family could be rebuilt, that love could triumph over fear. Emily's final painting of the day showed not the past's shadows, but the future's promise, a family portrait of herself, Alexander and James, surrounded by butterflies and light. In the background, faint but present, the shadows of Sarah and Victoria watched over them, reminders that every story, no matter how dark, could end in light. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of healing, love, and redemption. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences and reflections mean the world to us. Support our team by subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with friends and family who might find comfort in Sarah's story. Every like helps us continue creating meaningful content that celebrates the triumph of the human spirit. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories of hope and resilience. Together we can spread Sarah's message of love and healing.